Hey everybody, welcome back to Nikki T Live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with my old coworker Ridhwana Khan. Ridhwana, how you doing today?
Hi Nick, good and you?
Good, good, good. A little tired as well. You were mentioning you're a little tired. It's a little later in the evening over in Joburg there, I know. I'm
Yeah,
I I,
at
I had an early
7
start.
p.m. right now.
Oh, okay. So not as late as I thought it was actually,
Hmm.
but still, I'm sure after a work day, um, awesome.
Mhm.
Uh, well, first off, I'm glad we're hanging today because we haven't hung out in a while. So I'm selfishly also streaming with you just so we can hang out. But
That's awesome.
but for folks who might not know who you are, would you mind just kind of giving a little explainer of who you are, what you're up to, and if you want to talk about like how you got into tech, people always seem to find that interesting as well. So
Sure. So I'm Ridhwana. I'm a software engineer. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I dabble in full stack development. So I do a little bit of Ruby on Rails and JavaScript. I mean, I've worked with many other languages, but this is just currently what I'm working on. Some of my interests are I do a lot of conference speaking, I do some community building. So, uh, in the past, I've been involved in communities like Rails Girls and Women in Tech South Africa,
okay,
another community that dealt with the intersection of user experience and development. I haven't been doing community. I haven't been involved in communities this year. Just taking a little bit of a break.
yeah,
But I tend to work for companies that do community building. So I mean, I was
yeah, yeah.
working. Nick and I both we were working at Dev. We were working at Forum together, and now I'm working at a company called Circle, which also does community building.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't
I'm also
realize you worked there. It's
yeah,
circle.so.
I
Oh,
started
cool.
about a month ago. Um, so it's all new, but it's also in
Okay.
the community building space.
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Oh, that's super cool. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
relatively new. And then also, I'm doing a lot of technical writing. So I'm a writer for the Rails Foundation. I write the Ruby on Rails official documentation. That's really fun and cool. And yeah, that's basically an introduction to me. You asked how I got into programming.
Yeah.
It's such a long-winded story, but I did not know what programming was when I was at school. When I was
Okay.
in my final year of school, I was like, okay, what do I do with my life now? And I was really good at maths. I loved it. So I decided I wanted to do something with mathematics.
Okay.
And when I looked at the courses on at university, I was like, okay, what needs like a really good maths mark to get into? And computer science needed an A plus. And you basically that was like it indicated to me that we were going to be doing a lot of mathematics.
Hmm.
So I decided I'll give that a try. And I applied for it. I got into computer science. And with this in mind, I'd never touched programming before. I didn't know what an if loop was, I mean, an if statement was, a while loop. I didn't know any of this. But I
Okay.
did clarify with the university that it was okay. Was it okay if I didn't have previous like programming knowledge? And they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's fine. You don't need to know programming. And boy, oh boy, when I started my first year, I wanted to cry every single day. um, you did actually, they did assume that you knew the basics of programming. They assumed that you knew if statements, you knew how to use
Okay.
while loops, that you knew what an algorithm was. And I knew none of those things. So, like when the first assignment came, when the lecturer gave us the first assignment, and um, in school I was a relatively good student, so I always used to get A's, A pluses. And then I went my first assignment at university. I
Okay.
think I like barely passed, if I passed at all. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? How did I
Ah,
get here? That's a real crisis. um, Luckily, though, the university that I went to, and I don't know whether this was lucky or unlucky, but they focused a lot on theory. So there were very few actual coding assignments over the 3 years of my degree. So I
okay.
managed to just like really learn the theory and excel at that, and managed to get my Bachelor of Computer Science and Mathematics. And
Okay.
then I went into the working world and I was like, I never want to become a pro. I never want to code. I don't want to do development. I want to use, because I had my degree was computer science and mathematics. So I wanted to use the mathematics part of my career.
Okay.
Started my first job and it was a graduate program. So I got to like explore the things that I wanted to do. I
Hmm.
ended up at a networking company and they were doing optimizations of networks. So, like your wireless networks, your VSATs, your fiber, things like that. And I got to
Okay.
use the mathematics portion of my career during that time. So, we would
Oh, cool.
optimize the best network routes and stuff like that.
Okay.
I did that for the first year, and then I realized it's just taking the same calculation or formula and basically plugging new values into it. And I was like,
Okay.
I'm so bored out of my mind.
Yeah.
So I decided to find the engineering team at that company and apply to do some coding and join the engineering team. And I
Okay.
did that. And I basically feel like I learned how to actually program on my first job that that with that software development team.
Okay.
I realize it's really challenging and I love challenges. And then still doing it 12 years later, 10 to 12 years later.
Oh, that's
So,
cool.
yeah, very long winded,
Ah,
uncertain
it's all
routes,
good.
but I think I ended up where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. No, I can feel that. I went to uni as well, and in high school, I don't know if you grew up with people in high school where they knew exactly what they wanted to do. Like I
Mm-hmm.
remember one guy just saying, "I'm gonna be a doctor. I'm gonna be," and they
Mm-hmm.
that's what they became. And I was like, I'm not even really sure what I want to have for lunch, like let alone decide on my career. And like, so like high school, I mean, I did okay in high school, and then we went to
Yeah.
in Montreal or Quebec where I'm at. They have something called CEGEP. It's like pre-university, so
Yeah.
the I don't know how many grades you do in South Africa, but in Canada, aside from Quebec, it's up to grade 12. I
Yeah.
think
Same.
13 in some provinces. But basically in Quebec, you finish at grade 11, and some
Okay.
people jump straight to university if you go out of the province or like out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, you go to CEGEP, and the name's it's a it's I forget what it stands for. I think it's like Collège Études something. It's a French acronym.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. But anyways, I still didn't know what I wanted to do, and I think I failed my first semester because I was just hanging out with my girlfriend all the time and playing rugby, and that was about it. But then
The
and I was in pure and
freedom of
applied.
university.
Yeah, yeah. But then I was in the nice thing about CJEP at least is you don't really pay for it, so it's like it's not
Yeah.
like the same if you were to go to university and you bomb your first year and you paid I don't know how much,
Mm-hmm.
but then I ended up so I got booted out of pure and applied sciences, but I always did well at math as well, and
Yeah.
so I took it was called creative arts, and at that time you could just take literally whatever you wanted. So
Yeah.
uh, I took Cal 1 and Cal 2, and
Yeah.
then I took a few other courses, and I took a C++ course.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember why I took a C++ course, but like, I mean, it wasn't super complicated. Like the final test was to draw a Christmas tree with like a for loop to, like to just stars, and it built a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And then my cousin suggested a computer science program
Yeah.
co-op in another province, and
Yeah.
went there. Still didn't know if it was really what I wanted to do, but
Yeah.
in the meantime, like I'd always liked HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Like I was,
Yeah.
because this is like when the internet kind of, I mean, the internet's been around for a long time, but like when it started becoming commercially available,
Mm.
um, I was like building out silly websites on like GeoCities or like
Yeah.
writing stuff in Notepad, and I always liked that. But like it's only till after university that I started. I I don't know. I didn't really appreciate learning in university, but now outside of university, I'm always
Oh,
learning. It's kind of funny, but
yeah.
uh, oh, we got a few folks in the chat here. Cooks 96, thanks for joining us. They say, hello guys, I just started Ruby and Rails. Okay, well you came to the right place. And oh, good to see you, Bjorn, as well. Thanks for joining us. Cool, cool, cool. Oh, and Esty, who's somebody who checks out the stream a lot, she's busy today, so she won't. Bjorn's saying she's probably not gonna be around, but yeah, kind of like much like not the same path, but like still really
Mm-hmm.
wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and then I eventually really enjoyed programming, and I still like it. And I still find it challenging in a good way, and things are
Yeah.
changing too, and you know,
Yeah.
trying to stay on top of things, but that's super cool. So like you went from that networking, like algorithms to get the best network routes to programming, and then eventually we crossed paths in 2020
Mm.
because we both took a job at Dev 2. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty awesome because you're in South Africa, I'm in Montreal on the east coast of North America, and we had our first offsite in January 2020. It was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And then we came back, and then it was literally pandemic, everything shut down. So like
Yeah.
we got that in just to hang out, and then the world shut down. But it was, I don't know, it's still great to see so many people from like, because you were there, well, the founders obviously, like Ben, Jess, and Peter,
Mm.
um Palav, uh
Pavel,
Paul came from Poland.
Poland, yeah.
um uh,
Juliana,
yeah.
Colorado.
Oh yeah, Juliana, yeah, Colorado.
I
And
think Friday, Portland,
yeah, there was the Portland crew, and then like uh, Ben, Jess, and Peter. I think they were all in New
yeah.
York. And then
Alex was
why?
from Miami, isn't Florida?
Yeah, he's from Florida.
Mali,
Yeah, Molly, who's over at Netflix now. She was, forget where she was
Texas.
at the time. I think so, because I remember she used to go to Florida all the time because she's riding horses.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
but yeah, but anyways, it was
yeah.
just cool to, because it was my first full-time remote job. Like I was working at Autodesk before that, and I was partially remote, but they still didn't really
Mm-hmm.
like the partially remote. But anyways,
Yeah,
going to dev, and since dev I've been fully remote, and
yeah,
it was just great meeting the team. Like it still would have
yeah,
been great if we hadn't met, but it was definitely
yeah.
nice to have that opportunity, I think. And
The really cool thing that I found was we. I think I joined, and then the next week I was literally on a plane to Mohonk to
oh
meet
yeah,
the
that's right. Yeah,
team, and
yeah,
it's really cool when you join a new company to have that opportunity to meet pretty soon into your into your like work, because it means that you've already like forming these relationships, you know someone's
hmm,
personality, you
yeah,
can like tell tone of voice when you like reading a Slack message thereafter. Like it's really
yeah,
nice to be able to meet people before you actually start working with them. Unfortunately,
yeah.
that isn't always available as an opportunity, but it just the timing worked out really well in that case.
Yeah, and it was funny. We did some funny team building stuff. I mean, we had some work meetings, obviously, but
Mm,
for uh, for for folks who are curious, Ridhwana mentioned Mohonk. It's in New England. It's in New York State. So I'm in Montreal, so it was a few hours away. I think I flew there, but
mm,
if you've ever seen a show on Prime, it's called Upload, which is
mhm.
super funny. I love that show, but it's actually filmed in the place we were staying in Mohonk. So you can kind of get an idea of what the place was like where we were hanging. But I remember we did this, you do team building things when you're at these things, and we had I'd say a pretty unique team building experience. We had to make sleds out of plumbing piping, and then we had to race on the ice. So like uh basically we had somebody sitting on it, and then we had like I think two or three people pushing it, and then can't remember. I think our team won. I think I was with Molly and I forget who, but like basically whoever got. I think everybody's fell apart at some point, but even the people that crossed the finish line. But it was, anyways, it was pretty funny. You had to be there,
Yeah.
obviously, I guess, but all that to say is it was just really great hanging out. And yeah, to your point, I think remote works great, but yeah, I think you do need to meet your people at least once a year is a good thing, I think. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I think so.
cool, cool, awesome. So like post dev too, you've gone on to other things, and like you said, you're working at Circle now.
Yeah.
But you're also you've been big into Rails for a while. Like when we worked together, uh, I was focused more on the front end. I did do some stuff in Rails occasionally when it was
Mhm.
needed. But you've been doing Rails for a while, and I know you were at Rails World, which is that like the biggest Rails conf, or is it one of the big ones? Or
So I'm going to be at Rails World this year. It's in
okay, it
September.
hasn't
It's one of
happened yet.
the
Oh, okay,
It
okay,
hasn't
okay,
happened as yet.
okay,
The first Rails World was last year. I think where was it? It was in the US somewhere.
okay.
This is the second Rails World, and it will be happening in Toronto, Canada, in September.
Oh, no way.
September, end of September. Yeah.
Okay,
It's one of the biggest Rails cons. There is Rails Conf as well, which is really big. But from my understanding, next year will be the last Rails Conf that they're running because now
okay,
there's Rails World as well.
okay, okay. I didn't realize it's in Toronto. I can't guarantee that I can make
Mm.
it to Toronto, but because it's not that far, it's like well, I mean, it's a 6 hour drive, but like
Yeah.
I could I could conceivably hop on a train. But anyways, we could talk about that after. But okay, so are you attending RailsConf, or are you sorry, Rails World, or are you giving a talk, or both,
So I'm
or
giving a talk at Rails World. I am talking about demystifying the Rails code base. And
okay,
it sort of stems a little bit from being able to being a technical writer for the Rails documentation over the last, since I think February, March, so the last few months. Um, I when I write any documentation, sometimes I need to go into the code base and actually understand what's happening behind the scenes for me to be able to explain it to other people through the documentation. And
okay,
so, what I've been doing over the past few months is trying to navigate the code base. There's a lot of meta programming in Rails, so sort of navigating that entire domain, sort of inspecting modules, exploring concepts, things like that. And so, in this talk, I'll be talking a little bit more about how I do that, how I demystify some of that Rails magic, and
okay,
how certain components work. I think Rails is great for beginners. I think someone mentioned in the chat that they're just starting with Rails, and
yeah,
it's a really nice framework to start off with because Rails does so much for you. There's so much magic behind the scenes that happens to be able to allow you to quickly spin up an app like very easily.
yeah,
So but as you progress in your career, as you become more familiar with Rails, as you need to do more complex things, there
hmm,
is definitely some benefit to understanding how those components fit together. How does Rails do some of that magic so that if you ever
yeah,
need to do something weird and wacky, you can because you actually understand what's happening behind the scenes.
yeah. No, totally. That totally makes sense. And also, this is a another plus to, I mean, because I work in open source. You've already worked in open source. You're
Yeah.
currently working. Well, the Rails stuff is open source. I
Hmm.
think that's something I've always found. I'm saying the obvious here, but it's something I always found fascinating about open source is like, this isn't working. Why not? Oh, I can literally go look in the code and like,
Mhm.
and you could literally debug it, or like you could literally
Yeah.
pull Rails down and run it. I don't know what the setup is to run Rails locally, um, but you can do that,
Yeah.
and like closed source has its place, but I think this is something that I always find super cool is that you can potentially fix your own bugs by just because you see the code and you can figure out what to do. But I think it's also the another thing I love about open source is like when you don't understand something or you're trying to learn something, you can go and see like how did this person do it, or like the Rails code base is super mature. So like if you're looking to do
Yes.
Rails, like oh, these are the patterns they use in the actual Rails code base. So like I I think there's a lot of value in that, uh, and it's pretty cool that you've done that to be able to explain things from a technical standpoint too. It's not just like you know this is what you do, step one, step two, and
Yeah.
I think those deep dives are super helpful because I remember, like I said, I haven't done a ton of Rails, but a lot
Yeah.
of it's conventions, and like I remember stuff like
Mm-hmm.
so like it's really good at doing CRUD stuff because you can scaffold whatever, and then it just generates the form. It knows what
Yeah.
your model is, so then it knows what fields to populate, and like you can obviously
Mm-hmm.
change these things, but
Yeah.
uh, kind of like to the magic you were speaking to, which is
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious how you feel about the magic. Like it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes. Like, like it's great
Yeah.
because I can get up and running, like you said,
Yep.
but sometimes the magic might not be what you want. So
Yeah.
curious about your
No,
thoughts.
definitely. I think it really depends on the type of application you're building, right? If you're building an application that is going to adhere to, like, I don't know, conventional principles, I guess, that's pretty
Hmm.
straightforward. I think Rails is amazing for that. I think you're going to save a ton of time by using Rails. It scales pretty well too. But I think if you know upfront that your application is going to not be on that like straight sort of path, then you may want to do something extremely complex, or perhaps it's not going to be something um, that's just relatively simple to whip up.
Hmm.
You may when you may consider Rails, or you may consider something else. I think it really depends on the application you're using. It also, I think, within teams, it depends on the type of team you're trying to build. So one of the nice things about Rails is when you put a team of developers together, the documentation is so verbose and there's so many conventions that you don't end up with a ton of different kind of code conventions within one application.
Yeah,
That's a really nice thing when you're trying to scale your team and you're trying to build complex, big applications. Everyone's following similar conventions.
yeah,
Um, but if you're building something small and you don't necessarily need to uh, have teams follow the same conventions, things like that, then like there are alternatives as well.
yeah,
um, it can be frustrating for me, as it I know sometimes in the past I've been very frustrated when I'm trying to build something that's just a little bit like out of the box, like it's
okay,
not completely straightforward. And because of the convention over configuration nature of Rails, I'm like, damn, why can't I get to this to work? It's just like
yeah,
so
yeah,
frustrating. And then you go to the source code and you try and figure out, why can I not get this to work? It
yeah,
becomes it's great that, like you said, Rails is open source, so you can do that. But yes, as soon as you go off path a little bit, sometimes you end up working against the Rails conventions.
yeah,
Um, and if you end up hitting that wall too often, like if you're just constantly hitting against conventions of Rails, then that's probably an indication that maybe you want to use a different technology.
yeah. No, that's a good point.
But I am totally biased because I've been using Rails for ten years now, if not
Yeah,
more.
and Tix96 is saying they really enjoy Ruby, especially, and Bjorn
Hmm.
saying they want to try it out, but to be fair, it's been on my list for years. So I think Bjorn's
Hmm.
been procrastinating a bit. Um, but yeah, no, and there's a lot of tech built on top of Rails. Like GitHub still runs on Rails.
Hmm.
Obviously, the creators of Rails, like Basecamp and all that, they use it.
Yeah.
I know there's some other big apps. I can't think of them at the moment, but
Yeah.
um, but it's, oh yeah, Shopify. Obviously, they're big
Shopify, yeah,
Rails.
it's very big.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of core team members that work at Shopify now, or at least
yeah,
uh,
there
I
is.
don't, yeah, I'm trying to remember. I don't know because I'm not in the Rails ecosystem really, but I think Aaron Patterson is one of them that works at Shopify now. I forget his. I
Even
think his
Jamie is at
handles.
Shopify.
Oh yeah, okay. Oh yeah, our
Yeah.
old coworker. Is that
Yes,
who you
our
mean?
old coworker Jamie is at
Yeah,
Shopify.
yeah.
Do you know what I love about Rails the most? Besides the code base and besides the actual framework, I think the thing that I like most about Rails is the community. There's a very, very big Rails community out there, and most people are like super friendly and welcoming. Even when you go to conferences, I've been to a lot of different Ruby on Rails conferences. It's never sort of awkward. It's people are welcoming, people
Hmm.
are friendly, and it's just always good vibes, which is not, I feel like not all programming communities are that way. I've been to different programming community conferences, and I find Rails to be one of the more open, welcoming communities out there.
Oh, that's cool. Um, yeah, no, community is super important. Tux96 is asking, what do you think of Rails performance over the years, especially Ruby, because there's been upgrades to Ruby? And do you think that Ruby will be as close as compiled languages in the future? Um,
I
feel
think
feel free
that
to answer that however you want.
No, I think there's been improvements over the years. So I think whilst it we from comparatively from where we started to where we are right now, I think there's been really big improvements. The performance improvements sort of, I think, began in like I think 2008 and 9, where there was like query caching and the rack interface and things like that, and then
Hmm.
they improved it all over the throughout the years 2015. And then I think right now we in a good place. I think in 2022, I remember there was um, continued enhanced performance, and there was features. I think 2021 is where there was Rails 7 emphasized performance with features like Hotwire,
Yeah.
for faster front end updates without like JavaScript frameworks and stuff like that. And then I think Rails 6 brought the multi database support and optimization for large applications. I may be getting the years incorrect. I don't know it like textbook definitions offhand, but it's just vaguely from what I remember. And I
Yeah.
think that there's like I said, there's been improvements over the years. I think we'll just continue improving. I think Rails is a growing language, and well, Ruby is a growing language, Rails is a growing framework. And I think with maintainers and contributors and the growth mindset that is at the Rails Foundation, I think that we can only see, like, I only see bigger things happening for Rails. I
Okay.
see people wanting to improve the framework, and so I do think we'll eventually get to a very good place, and it maybe at some point even we could compare to compiled languages.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious about, these are just things I've seen at my time when we were at Dev and stuff, but I remember there's optional types in Ruby now, I think, and then there's I can't remember if it was Stripe or Shopify, but there was a project called Sorbet that was like types. That was a while ago. Let me see if I can
Yeah.
find it. But I'm pretty sure
Oh yeah,
there's,
so Bay is a type checker for Ruby that allows you to add static type annotations to your Ruby code. That's pretty cool.
yeah.
I've actually you teaching me something today.
I just remember seeing it. It was when I was working at Dev still, because I remember I created a discussion post about it,
Yeah,
because like I'm a big fan of TypeScript, and
TypeScript.
there was there was like a whole debate at, well, a healthy debate, but like I was trying to
Mm,
get TypeScript into the code base at the time, and then uh, most of the team was Rails devs, I think, and so they were
yes.
just like they didn't want that burden of another compile step, and
Mm,
I think Rhymes and Michael, that's kind of like was their thinking about it, and I was fine with it. I just ended up using JS Doc, which still gave me
yeah.
kind of an
Mm,
IntelliSense, but I just brought that up because I remember reading about Sorbet, and then I'm I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure like Ruby, not Rails, but like Ruby itself has optional types now, I think, but I'm not positive about that. I feel like I could have read about that. Be optional types. Let's see. Uh,
It says I don't know if this is I'm using ChatGPT, but it says optional types are not built into Ruby itself. But I'm also using
okay,
ChatGPT 3.5, so it
okay,
may
okay,
be outdated.
okay. Cool. Um, but yeah, well, anyways, we don't need to go down the rabbit hole of types, but yeah, there's definitely been improvements to the language over time, just like a lot of languages. But
Yeah,
I think the interesting thing about Rails for me, from somebody outside of the Rails ecosystem, is
yeah,
people are trying to recreate what Rails did in other languages. Like, for example, like because I'm mainly in the JavaScript TypeScript ecosystem at the
hmm
moment. So there's a great project called Redwood JS. It's a React
mm,
meta framework. It's created by like I think it was originally created by Tom Preston Werner, who's like who created GitHub, or was one of the founders. I think he created GitHub. I can't remember. He's definitely one of the
yeah,
founders, but they love the Rails convention. So like for folks who haven't used Rails, you can scaffold things pretty easily. So like that's a nice feature, and they've done that in Redwood, for example. I know when I was working at Netlify, talking with the Remix team for another React Meta framework. Yeah, I don't think this landed, but I think Ryan Florence was messing around with scaffolding as well, just because it's a nice way to start things, right?
mm,
Um,
yeah,
and just a lot of Railsisms. I don't know if that's the term, but like people who had worked in those in that ecosystem have been trying to
yeah,
bring it elsewhere, and I
yeah.
it's I guess all that to say is I think it's a testament to that Rails did something really well, and people are trying to recreate it at this point. So
Yeah, I mean, when I want to work up a side project, I don't want to spend a ton of time scaffolding and putting everything together and fidgeting with the asset pipeline and um, like doing a lot of configuration. And Rails really ace that because you can just like whip up an application in like literally like less than a minute, and then you
yeah,
just need to know how things fit together. So that's yeah, that there's really power to that.
yeah, totally. And I definitely feel that in the JavaScript ecosystem because um, basically prior to the meta frameworks, like like at least in the context of React, it was always like just do whatever you want, like
Hmm.
use whatever you want for state management, use whatever for
Yep.
this. And it's kind of like it gets back to the like so Rails is big on conventions over configuration, and they're opinionated,
Hmm.
uh and it's just kind of like it's a trade-off. Like I think having strong opinions is good because you can just get to work, unless you're like
Yeah.
really die hard like that, like I absolutely hate what Rails is doing maybe. But like if
Yeah.
you're just like I don't like all these things, but you know what, it makes me productive. And
Yeah.
I've definitely had analysis paralysis in JavaScript land before, of like, okay, what should I use for that? What should I use for this? And like the meta
Yeah.
frameworks are definitely solving a lot of that. Like if you're using Next.js
Yeah.
or Astro or Remix or Redwood, they do have opinions baked in there now. There's still
Yeah.
stuff you can decide on what you want to use, um, but yeah, I think it's also just as I get older too, it's like it's cool when I was younger to like, hey, let's
Yeah.
pick this, let's pick that, let's spend 2 hours figuring out how I'm gonna build my blog site and never write a blog post. But you know, uh, but nowadays it's just like, I just need to deliver business value. Let's pick something that is sensible, seems to
Yeah.
work well, industry standard, air quotes maybe, and just
Hmm.
go with that. It's like, I don't know. It's, people still have their favorites, obviously, but I don't know. That's kind of the way I feel these days. Not to say like it's still good to experiment with stuff for
Yeah.
sure and like try out things, but I just find like nowadays it's like, I don't know. Like I can give a perfect example. Like I probably wouldn't start a new project in Next.js. Like I like
Yeah.
Astro, so I would probably start a project in Astro. But when I
Yeah.
joined open source, they already had Next.js,
Yeah.
and I'm not about to rip out Next.js to switch it to Astro or Remix because
Mm.
unless there's like tremendous business value in me doing that, there
Yeah.
it's just somebody saying, "Hey, I don't like this. Can we refactor this?" And that's like when it comes down to dollar bills, that doesn't really
Yeah.
fly. Like so, and anyways, all that
I
to say is
know.
like a lot of people use Next.js. It's quite capable,
Yeah.
so like, it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
we're building great stuff with it. So, but yeah, I don't know, rambling on a bit there, but
Yeah.
yeah,
On your
uh,
on your point about I've started using, you were talking about types earlier. I've actually started using TypeScript because
oh, okay,
Circle uses TypeScript.
okay, yeah,
Um, and it's interesting. I mean, I dabbled with TypeScript in like my personal projects, but I've never used it on a production application. So
okay,
it's been interesting getting used to types. Um,
yeah,
it's I think it definitely safeguards your code a lot.
yeah,
I have been using a little bit of GitHub Copilot to fill out my types, and GitHub Copilot isn't always the best type deduction agent.
yeah. No, all these things that they're still being improved, but
Yeah,
they're still helpful. But yeah, there's some so, like whether it's like Chat GPT, Copilot, Gemini, Claude.
yeah,
Sometimes you're just like, no, that's not what I meant at all, or no, it tries its best, but I
yeah.
do find it. I find Copilot works well for me, like for a lot of common stuff I do. So like in React, for
Mm,
example, you map over an array of items very frequently to
mm,
just output something, and so like it knows those patterns really well, and it's usually pretty good at that.
yeah.
But there's also we have access to GitHub Copilot Chat as well, which I've
Hmm.
found
Yeah.
pretty useful too. But I
It's a
mix it up.
really
I
nice
use
rubber
several
duck.
tools. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I feel like previously where I'd have this need to maybe chat to someone like, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? I find that both GitHub Copilot and even ChatGPT, they serve as like good rubber ducks, just like bouncing your ideas off and hoping
yeah,
for something to stick.
yeah. No, that's how I treat it as well. Like, don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's like it'll give me an answer, and I'm like, that's
Hmm.
exactly what I need.
Hmm.
Uh, but even when these tools don't give me the exact answer, it's like you said, I treat it like a rubber duck as well. And what one thing I've noticed, and I mean this is true of actual rubber ducking too. Like I have
Hmm.
a rubber duck corgi care of Jason
Love
Langsdorff.
that.
um, but um, but the thing with the rubber ducking, whether it's talking to an actual physical fake duck or ChatGPT or Copilot, is I've
Hmm.
found it's forced me in a good way to clarify my thoughts.
Hmm.
So it's like, you could say something like, I don't know, um, create an image, or not an image, but like create me a component that shows a loading state or something. And then it
Hmm.
spits something out, and you're like, okay, that's not what I want. I didn't want text, so then I could get more
Hmm.
specific. Can
Hmm.
you include like an CSS animation with and you kind of keep refining, and like
Yeah.
uh, and I've just found it's helped me explain things better to people
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Mm. That's something that I learned actually at Dev. So I've worked at a lot of remote companies, but every remote company has their variation of like asynchronous practices.
hmm,
But we both know Dev was very async first. So
yeah,
before messaging someone to say, let's hop onto a call and discuss this, ideally you want to actually put an explanation into Slack to let
yeah,
them know what you've been working on. And I often found myself writing down an entire explanation in Slack. Hey, this is what I'm working on. This is the problems I'm coming up with. And by the end of that, like written summary, I'm like, I know how to solve this
yeah,
because
yeah,
I've
exactly.
actually processed and thought through it in actual
100.
words.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. Like to like in the context of Slack is
Mm,
it's happened several times where people will ask me something, and like the expectation of all the like remote places that actually work in a real remote way, like Dev, Netlify, and like
mhm.
now open source, is you're not expected to respond to Slack immediately as soon as a message
Yes.
shows up. and
Yeah.
and sometimes when I see the messages and I just look at the question really quickly, I'll
Mm,
be like, I'm not going to answer yet, because not
yeah.
because I don't want to help, but I want
Yeah.
to let it simmer a bit, to your point about like when you're writing it out, like I'm
Mm,
having this problem with. And more often than not, people like they throw out that
yeah.
initial question, and then
Yeah.
like 10 minutes go by, and then I
Yeah.
I see a follow-up message, never
Yeah.
mind, I figured it out, or
Yeah.
and it's like
Either that or
um
they just quietly, sneakily delete the message
yeah,
hoping
yeah,
you
yeah,
haven't
yeah, yeah,
seen it.
exactly,
I've
yeah,
done
yeah.
that many
this
times.
this never happened. Yeah, so it's, yeah, no, totally. But and it but like communication is super important, like in general, but in the context of a remote company it's super important, as we both know. But
Mm,
like because like and I tell this to people, and this is why also, like, I think, you know once you start getting involved with, I'm a big fan of open source, but like I think one of the superpowers of it too is like, for people who are looking for remote work, you know it's a great way to start practicing some of these things, and
mhm,
like, for example, like when we were working together, the time zone difference for you and me wasn't too bad. Like, it would be my mid morning and maybe the end of your day, or my early
mhm.
morning, it's your late afternoon. Like, but like our old coworker Michael, or he's in Thailand, or Rajat was in India,
India.
and so like you end up
Yeah.
with like almost a, I don't think it was 20 hours different, but it was a huge enough difference that like
Mhm.
at the end of my day, like Michael is sleeping, and
Yeah.
so like if I just throw out a question like, "Hey Michael, this isn't working,"
Yeah.
you know, and then he
Mm.
wakes up in the morning, he's gonna see that and he's gonna go, "Well, what's the problem?" And then it's gonna be this
Yeah.
ping pong thing. So
Yes.
so, so you definitely need to put in that time to ask the question, and like,
Mhm.
and it obviously varies between your experience, but like
Yeah.
I think if I always just tell people, regardless of what level they're at, just do the best to your abilities of your due diligence of like why you're stuck on something, and I
Yeah.
think that's all you need to ask from people. But
Yeah. Something we used to do in our team. So, sometimes Juliana and I used to pay, and Juliana's in Colorado. But we did have a bit of a time difference. And
yeah,
so what we used to do, instead of like getting on a call and pairing, we used to just start up a pull request. Juliana would basically create a pull request. She'd throw out her work in progress there, and then she'd start commenting on the pull request and saying like,
yeah,
hey, this is what's happening here, this is where I need help, this is what I thought about. And essentially our version of peer programming was doing pull request reviews in a draft
yeah,
state, where she'd walk me through the code, just fire up draft pull request, and it worked really well. We
hmm,
both got to be able to think through the problem, because one of the things that I still struggle with today is both with interviews or even just like snappy calls. I tend to be someone that needs to process things before I'm able to like help you and
Yeah.
before I'm able to throw out solutions. I just need a few moments to like process it, think through it. I don't do well being put on the spot. And
Hmm.
so peer programming sessions without some context are like my worst nightmare. Like I want to know in which part of the code we're digging into so that I can
Yeah.
just like muck around a little bit, or even in interview processes, like I want to kind of know what we're going to be doing rather than like just being given a problem on the spur of the moment
Yeah.
and being forced to solve it. So that really works like with asynchronous communication, and it like sets some really good practices and helps people to communicate their needs better, and then
Hmm.
probably also allows the other person to think more deeply about the problems and provide um, sort of just the relevant help that they can.
No, totally. And to your point about draft pull requests, I think those are still an underappreciated, or even I feel like some people still aren't aware of them. And it's a
Mm,
great way to get visibility. Like you're basically saying, I don't want this like reviewed yet to merge, but like here's what I'm thinking. Like I mean, you definitely have discussions in like an issue, like this is what I'm
mm-hmm,
thinking in terms of like the approach, the
mm,
architecture. But once you've made those decisions, like it's still useful to throw that up there and say like, I don't know, I'm stuck on this, or what do you think about this approach still? Like, even though you've had some
yeah.
pre-discussions, and then and just comments in general in issues and pull requests, I find super helpful because like even for myself as the person that did the pull request, it's
Mm-hmm,
like maybe like 3 months later when I'm looking at an issue related to it, I have like it's like I've completely forgotten what I did in there, and then I get all this context back
yeah.
by seeing the comments and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's
And
yeah,
like not only you, right? Like if someone else is working on the feature and they're like,
yeah,
oh, why did someone do this? They can just go back to this pull request. Even if it was
exactly,
just closed and it wasn't actually merged, they can go back
yeah,
to it and they get all this context of why decisions were made. It's very
yeah.
valuable.
Yeah, the context about the decision one is super important because people might look at something a year later and then just hold on a sec. Oh, hey Arvin, thanks for joining us. I'm doing well. Hope you're doing well as well. Um, yeah, no, because like maybe these decisions were made like a few years ago. Technology's
Hmm.
changed or evolved, and some new person
Hmm.
comes in like, why are they using this? And then then you go back to the
Yeah.
context and that's why.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it's a bit it's big for sure. And it's like also getting back to like one of the benefits of open source too is like we were saying, like the code base is there, you can literally explore it, but pull requests and issues are an amazing place to learn as well, right? Like
Yeah.
because you get the full context of it as opposed to just like looking at it in the code base.
Yeah.
And I think those are really great learning tools as well, and
Yeah.
i I think I don't know, I feel like maybe people don't always do that, like I definitely find it super useful. um
Yeah. Definitely. The one of the first tasks that I did when starting at the Rails Foundation and doing the technical writing was, I think there was an extension, and I stand to be corrected. I'm actually just looking it up now. But there was, I think it was action text.
okay.
There was a there was a new feature added to action text, and there was this pull request. um, was it action text? I really do stand to be corrected. I can't remember exactly which component it was, but
Okay.
they had basically added this new methods and some new features. And it didn't exist in the Rails documentation as yet. So I had to
Okay.
go in and I had to look at the pull requests and things like that. And that's when I realized that, like, looking at the pull request and understanding the context of the decisions that were being made, as well as how the code evolved from that first draft to like where it is right now, really
Yeah.
sets you up for success in like understanding how Rails works and in understanding better patterns, because a lot of the time someone creates the pull request and then they get a whole lot of comments from, in this case of Rails, from the maintainers or even other open source contributors that basically
Hmm.
alerts them to better patterns or alerts them to, I don't know, maybe like better coding
Hmm.
architectural styles. And so
Yeah.
looking through those pull requests really, really just give you an immense amount of knowledge and context. And
Yeah.
that
Totally.
really helps to make you a better developer.
Yeah. And just want to say hi to ST in the chat. Thanks for joining us. Um, yeah, the well, B Dougie's my CEO now. I always feel weird calling B Dougie Brian Douglas my CEO a CEO. I always consider
Yeah,
it's just like my coworker, but he's technically the CEO.
yeah,
But I did a few streams with him before I started working there, and
yeah.
we were talking about like one of the interesting things I was chatting about. This is when I was working at Dev, and I brought up this example of I because we were for context we were using Preact at Dev 2 in a bespoke manner
Mm,
with a Rails stack, and I was stuck on something, and I didn't I didn't really ask on social media for help, but I just kind of said something like working on this PR, stuck on something.
mm,
And then out of the blue, Jason Miller, who's the creator of Preact, chimes in on my PR because I had linked it, and he's like, "Well,
yeah,
try this and try that,"
yeah,
and and then uh, B Dougie was kind of saying it's like that's one of the beauties of these things. You can like all of a sudden like I'm a big fan of basketball too, but he was giving kind of like example of basketball. You can go play with the pros and they're just showing up in your PRs, and again to learning from
yeah,
PRs, you can go look at like Jason Miller started Preact. There's a lot of been other amazing people working on it. You can go look at that and see like
mm,
what they've been doing. So I don't know. It, there's definitely a lot of benefits to things being open. There's we don't need to open the can of worms of like maintainer burnout, but that's something that
yeah,
ties into it. Um,
mm,
but I'm actually curious how you got into, and I'll drop a link to it again to the Rails guide. So
mm,
like you said, you've been doing software development for about 12 years now.
yeah.
Um, and somebody's just dropped a comment. Brian B. Dougie seems really chill and cool. Yes, I can confirm that. ST. Yes, he is. Um, but so like obviously documentation is important. It's also kind of like what we've been talking about. Communication is key.
Mhm.
I guess how did you get involved? Like obviously you're a fan of Rails, but how did you get involved as becoming a technical writer for the Rails guides?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it was when last year, October, when Dev had laid off a big portion of the engineering team. So um, I was part of that layoffs. I decided to take a few months off. I didn't
Okay.
know how many months I was going to take off and just like relax, work on my side projects, things like that.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a little bit, and being the really the worry what that I am about not having a job and not like doing things with my life. I was
Yeah.
like, I can't just be at home chilling, even though I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
So I seen a post from the Rails Foundation where they were looking for a part-time technical writer to contribute to the Rails guides,
Okay.
and I mean, from the days of Dev, I love sort of documenting things. I love writing about
Yeah.
decisions. I always created really long posts on dev.to for like the decisions we were making, or
Hmm.
just to give everyone on the team an understanding of what our team specifically was doing and what sort of work we did, etc.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy writing. I wrote a couple of articles as well over the years that um, yeah, that I enjoyed. I seen the Rails guide when I seen the job opportunity or the contracting opportunity. It was, I think, 10 hours for the week, and you'd be responsible for essentially updating the Rails guide, so creating some new guides as well as updating the existing ones. And I
Okay.
thought it was just a really cool opportunity. I It's a good way for me to flex my technical writing skills, but also I seen it as an
Hmm.
opportunity to dive deeper into the Rails code base. So I always wanted to dive deeper into the Rails code base. When you're working on projects, for instance, like dev, and you're trying to meet deadlines and you're trying
Hmm.
to build out features, you're always deprioritizing diving into the Rails code base, because that's going to take a really long time to do and figure out like the meta programming that's involved there and how things work. So
Okay.
even
Yeah.
though that has been a goal of mine for a really long time, I just feel like I always just deprioritized it. And so I seen the technical writing as a good way to dive into the code base as well. So I
Yeah.
applied and I got accepted, and that's how I started writing for the Rails guides. It's
Okay.
a pretty cool process as well. So it's not I don't work on it alone. There's another technical writer, Boomi,
Okay.
and then there's two reviewers, so Patrick and Carlos, and they review from a technical perspective. And then
Okay.
we have two reviewers that review from a more sort of beginner friendly language perspective, and that's Amanda
Okay.
from the Rails Foundation. And Harriet recently joined as well, so she's also reviewing from a like beginner language perspective. And
Okay.
the really cool thing is that what so the process that I follow is essentially I'll look at a guide, I'll investigate a little bit more, I'll update the guide, and then I'll send out a
Yeah.
PR. And this will be just to the actual documentation team.
Okay.
And so usually I'd aim for one technical review and then one sort of beginner from perspective of a beginner review.
Hmm.
And I get a ton of feedback. I don't know if you've seen one of my tweets, but like sometimes I can have like, I think on my one PR, when I submitted it eventually to the community, I had like over 100 um, conversations on that PR, which is
Oh
super
wow.
cool. It means that like people are interested and there's a lot to improve. Um, but yeah, so it first goes through the documentation team. Once I make all those changes, then I send it out to the community. It stays there for a week for sort of community contributors to then contribute to the PR and give any feedback, etc. And then we have conversations about it. And
Okay.
eventually, it then gets merged back into the Rails code, the Rails documentation code base.
Okay.
So it's a really thorough and good process. The community is really involved. I've found that on every one of my documentation PRs, there's been a ton of comments. There's been a ton of people saying like, "Hey, what about this?" or "We'd like to get more detail on this particular aspect."
Hmm.
So it's been really great to collaborate with both the documentation team and the community as well in Rails.
That's awesome. Got a bunch of hearts and 100 emojis about all that. So that resonates with some folks in the chat. Um,
Yeah, and if any one of the folks in the chat want to review PRs, you should totally go ahead. It's a nice way to get into like just I guess exploring open source.
mhm.
You can just drop your feedback. I mean, sometimes there's even just typos. Like I'm human, and sometimes I make a random typo on the documentation. You should totally comment on it and eventually you sort of build up from there, and you start commenting on documentation, and then eventually you start commenting on code as well. And who knows,
Hmm.
one day you're a core contributor for Rails.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, no, and I dropped a link to you mentioned at the beginning of the stream you're going to be giving a talk at Rails World because you I was looking through your Twitter profile because you were mentioning about the PRs being merged and stuff, but I found your question about what what would you like explained for my talk, and it, that just made me think like well, a couple things. I think it's super interesting that part of the review process for the documentation is there's the technical aspect that makes sense, but I like the fact that there's a like a checkbox to say is this beginner friendly as well, and that's kind of like the first time I've officially heard that in a
Mhm.
documentation code base. Like
Mhm.
I think our team does it well. Like Becca, part of what Becca's role is, my coworker, is documentation as well, and she's doing a
Mhm.
great job over there with the team we have over there. But and we do write stuff in a beginner friendly way too. But it's just interesting that there's an actual like is this beginner friendly and like there's
Yeah,
actually somebody like that's their job. I found that super
yeah.
interesting.
Because I mean, I've
But
been doing Rails now for 12 years, right? So sometimes I miss things that to me over the 12 years have become second nature. So
yeah,
it's a really good to get it from a fresh perspective.
yeah, no, totally. And I lost my train of thought because I was reading one of the comments. But um, but yeah, no, yeah, getting to that, like you kind of lose your beginner mindset. Like obviously, if
Mhm.
I'm jumping on learning something new, I will have a beginner mindset to some degree, but it's like
Mhm.
it's still kind of polluted a bit because like I've been programming for a long time, so there's a lot of stuff I'll probably skim over like okay, this is just syntax or something. So like
Yeah.
and I was speaking to Eleftheria Batsu who's runs community over at Crab Nebula, and
Hmm.
she was saying like a lot of her initial blog posts because she used to work at Hashnode as well, but she blogged quite a
Hmm.
bit on Dev 2 as well, and she was saying like even to this day her like first approaches to some blog posts where she was like brand new to programming still perform the best, and I
Hmm.
was kind of saying to her like if I wrote that same thing I'm guessing it probably wouldn't do as well because my experience is polluting my teaching.
Yes.
You know what? Like
Yeah.
not that
Yep.
experience is bad, but in the context of a like a first look at
Hmm.
something, I and this gets back to it's kind of tangent, but like in terms of content creation, when people say like why should I blog about Rails? You know, it's been around forever and like there's like a million blog posts about it, but
Hmm.
it gets back to that whole thing like whether it's beginner mindset or just the way you teach things, it might click or
Hmm.
resonate with somebody better than the way somebody else does. And it doesn't mean one's good or bad, it's just people learn differently. So,
Yeah. I mean, it's also the words we use. I've had a few PRs reviewed where I'm just using, for instance, willy nilly the word polymorphic associations, and I'm not actually. I'm talking about. I'm talking about it in the context of like something
hmm,
um, like a niche topic, and then I'm using the concept of polymorphic associations, but I'm not actually linking back to the section where I or a completely different guide where I discuss polymorphic associations. So things like that. I'm assuming that just everyone knows what a polymorphic association, and that's a terrible assumption to make because I didn't know what a polymorphic association was when I joined the industry. Took me
yeah,
many
yeah,
years to figure out what polymorphic associations are. So um, yeah, so it's the language we use as well, and the terminologies that we just assume others know, like words like proxies and things like that, where Amanda and Harriet do a really good job of just calling those out in the pull requests.
yeah. And Esty in the chat saying just in regards to the beginner's mindset and stuff, you get disconnected
Mm.
over time with the early stage
Mm.
struggles. They're so distant. And Bjorn's saying, to be fair, docs also try to be beginner friendly. We fail, I believe. I think he's talking about his own project, the
Yeah.
API bench, which Bjorn was on the live stream on Monday. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but then he says, but then again, we don't have a Ridhwana yet. So there you go. That's a little hat tip to you.
That's
Um,
also.
but it's funny you talk about polymorphic associations. I could have sworn I wrote a blog post about them, but when because like Vitahe used to work with us as well,
Yeah.
and Vitahe's last name is escaping me for some reason. But I don't know why it's escaping me. Uh, Maybe it's because I just always just said it's Vitahe. But Vitahe was doing Rails as well at Dev 2, and I remember there was something I had to do in the back end, and I had to use polymorphic associations. So that just
Yeah.
popped in my head. I could have sworn I wrote a short blog post about that, but I can't find it. I'm just looking. I looked for Nikki T online and polymorphic associations, but I didn't. Anyways, um, but yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember that. That's where that was the that's not the many to many associate. It was something else. The polymorphic association.
No,
It's a
it
Rails
basically
specific thing.
it's yeah, it's basically a type of active record that allows a model to belong to another model, and it uses a single association. So it's kind of useful
Okay.
when you have multiple models that need to share a single resource. I think we definitely had polymorphic associations in
Yeah.
dev too. I forget what tables they were,
Yeah. I feel
but
like maybe a user table, but I don't know. I can't remember.
it's
But
gonna bother me.
it's
I'm gonna have
essentially
to
active
go and check
record.
the code.
The ORM, the object relational mapper. It was
Mhm.
basically that just kind of abstracts away the foreign key for the association for it. I think that
Yeah.
was the main thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Anyways, we're not live coding here, but it just literally popped in my head when you said that, and I'm like I was positive I wrote something about it because like after Vitahe, like it wasn't difficult to understand. It was just more I didn't know what it was, and I
Yeah.
remember I think I did a pairing session with Vitahe, and she explained to me
Yeah.
what it was in the context of Rails, and then
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I didn't write it, or maybe you know what? Maybe it was an internal thing I wrote. I don't know, but uh,
I I remember what we used it for in dev.2. It was, I think, commentable type and commentable IDs. And
oh,
the
okay,
commentable could be the article or it could be a comment. And yeah, anyways, it was
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
bother me.
yeah, exactly. Well, the good news is if anybody's interested, you can actually go look in the Dev 2 code base or forum code base. So,
Yes.
but yeah. Um, but yeah, but getting back to that's kind of getting back to the magic of Rails, like, and the nice thing of having like something like active record, it just like it abstracts away a lot of the database stuff you don't have to do. uh,
Yeah.
I think it's still
Yeah.
good to understand what's happening in the database for sure,
Yeah.
um, but again, I think this ties back to like one of the reasons why you love Rails so much and how you're able to be so productive with it because like um,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you part time on the Rails guides documentation still? I imagine so because you work at Circle now,
Yeah,
or
so I'm working for Circle now, but then in I only do 10 hours a week on the Rails guide. So I mostly just do like 2 hours every evening,
okay.
um, doing some Rails guide things or over the weekend.
Hmm.
It's like a fun, it's something fun that I enjoy doing. So I don't find that I'm like dreading it when I'm like doing it in the evenings after a long day at work. It's something that I actually like doing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny for people who don't work in tech. I find this like I'm like close work laptop, open my own laptop. Okay, now let's relax a bit.
Yeah,
which
yeah,
which people are like, I don't know, like, because most of the people I know, like, I
yeah,
mean, I have people in my Twitter bubble and like my
yeah.
coworkers and like people in the communities I know, but like when I, like most of my community outside of all that is like rugby and like
Mm,
stuff. So it's like, yes, there's definitely a few
yeah.
programmers and stuff, but it's like it's definitely not usually like, okay, work's done. Let's go get the personal laptop. So it's I don't
Let's
know.
go write some more code or
Yeah.
documentation.
Yeah, it reminds me of
Yeah.
a funny meme I saw today. I'll mention in a sec, but just
Yeah.
ST was just mentioning. Um, I've been interested in Ruby on Rails for a long time. It's been on my to-do list since forever. Someone said it's similar to Angular. Never really took the time to compare. And then Bjorn saying maybe we should build something with React next week. SC. So we always have side chats going on too in the
Mm,
chat. but uh, but yeah, I don't know if it's similar to Angular. Angular is has a lot of object. I haven't done that much modern Angular. My
yeah.
coworker Brandon Roberts actually created a meta framework with Angular, but
Mm,
a lot of what I've seen in Angular, even when I was doing it in the older days, is
yeah.
uh, it's typically object oriented focus and a
Mm,
lot of like dependency injection and like stuff you see in object oriented land, like not
mhm.
so much in you know uh, but I don't know if Rails does Rails do dependency injection and stuff. I don't know enough about
So
Rails.
the last time I used Angular was probably in 2000. I think it was before React even came out. I think Angular came out first
Okay.
and then React came out, right? So
Yeah.
I've used Angular a really long time ago. At that time, I don't think I found too many similarities between
Okay.
Ruby on Rails and Angular. But maybe there are some now.
Yeah. I know, again, like I'm just basing it on more recent conversations I've had with like my coworker Brandon. I know they're doing some functional programming stuff, like they've got function
Mm,
components as opposed to
mm.
old style, um
Oh,
but
that's
aside from
interesting.
that, yeah, I was really surprised by like I can't speak to modern Angular itself, but like analog, which my coworker made. I went through kind of like the get started guides because like
Yeah,
my experience was like you. The last time I used Angular was version 1.4.3, so it was Angular JS because now it's called just Angular, but so like
yeah,
completely different. And I found it really, I don't want to say easy, but it was pretty straightforward to get up and running following the analog get started guide. There's
yeah,
stuff I was a little lost with because there's like I just didn't understand certain angularisms, but
yeah,
like just following the docs, just getting it all comes back to docs, right? It
yeah,
was just they were just written well, and I was able to. I think the tutorial was like, let's build a blog, kind of. It
yeah.
didn't connect to database or anything. It was just like static markdown and stuff, yeah, it worked out pretty well. Yeah, okay. The folks in the chat are deciding should we do Next.js or Rails for our next project. So Rails is on the
Rails,
table. It looks like. Yeah, yeah.
Rails. There's so
Ridhwana's
many
not.
people that
Yeah,
said they want to try out Rails in the chat. So sounds like
yeah, yeah.
Rails is a
No,
good
for sure.
option.
I guess like this is a kind of open-ended question, but like curious your thoughts. Like obviously you're biased. You're a big fan of Rails, but like
Hmm.
I've heard people before say like Rails is old, like are people still building new apps with it? Like
Yeah.
curious about your thoughts on that. And then this one's a bit more spicy, but I'm curious about and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but
Hmm.
because I'm definitely not trying to throw you under the bus with this, but like
Hmm.
obviously DHH created Rails.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely had all kinds of controversies
Mm-hmm.
since pretty much the pandemic, and just curious on that. And
Yeah.
and the only reason why I bring it up, it's not to get spicy. It's just because it really
Yeah.
does touch on like the community. Uh,
Yeah.
that's kind of why I was curious.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of talk recently about Rails being not as popular and sort of being old and outdated, things like that. But I can't remember who did this survey. I think it might have been, is it Robbie Russell? Um,
Oh, the Oh My ZSH,
oh my
Robbie Russell.
ZSH, yeah, yeah. I think they did a survey, and I stand to be corrected. Maybe it wasn't Robbie Russell, and it was done by the Rails Foundation, but they did a
Okay.
survey on people and companies using Rails this past year, and the numbers were really high, and they accounted for a lot of people are still using Rails and
Okay.
are actively um, building new things with Rails. So I do think that it is still um, it still has a strong community supporting it. It has a proven track record.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's a sort of considered old. I think that with the new updates to Rails as well, I think it provides a lot more opportunities for new applications to build very cool things with it. Um,
Yeah.
so that's sort of my thoughts on it. And like I said, I am biased, but I do honestly believe that um, that Rails is a viable and popular choice for web development,
Yeah.
especially for startups that benefit from like rapid development. Um,
Yeah.
and then to answer your second question,
The
I
spicy
mean,
one.
yeah, yeah, the spicy one. I I think, yeah, I mean, the things that DHH says sometimes are controversial, but I think there's a lot more community behind Rails. It's whilst DHH is one of the core contributors and has significantly shaped the roadmap of Rails. I think that there are a lot of other people also doing really good work on Rails and are helping to shape that roadmap. Sorry, my cat just made an appearance.
Oh yeah. Hey
Um,
Zeus. That's not Zeus. That's
this is
somebody
Zoe
else.
actually.
Okay. I haven't
So
met Zoe yet.
no, this is the new addition to our
Oh, hey
household,
Zoe.
Zoe. The little
Yeah.
ginger.
For context,
Um,
when me and Ridwana used to have meetings, her other cat Zeus would just show up and like just be like, "Oh, you're talking on Zoom. I'm just gonna come and interrupt." So, anyways,
yeah,
uh,
Zeus
yeah.
is not here today. He's somewhere upstairs. But Zoe has been sleeping on my desk.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah.
um,
So
Yeah, so I think there's an army behind Rails, and I think they're doing really good work. And whilst there is definitely controversy surrounding some of the things that DHH says and does, I think the the roadmap that we're following on Rails is one that's helping Rails to grow and helping it to become even sort of more popular than it is. So I don't have too many spicy takes on it, but I put a lot of emphasis that there's an even bigger community driving Rails. So whilst DHH is one of the main contributors, there's a ton of other people doing a ton of great work on Rails.
no, that's great. No, thanks for sharing. I, yeah. The I was just curious about that first question because I'm definitely in a Twitter JavaScript TypeScript
Hmm.
ecosystem bubble. So like people typically don't say like well like it's the internet, so people will just say like something's old or whatever, and then
Yeah.
um but yeah, it's definitely interesting. I definitely know it's used in a lot of places. Like when I worked at Autodesk prior to Dev 2, um, the app I worked on, which was project management software for like large companies like Disney, Netflix. It
Yeah.
was like it was project management software for like uh, uh, film companies or gaming companies and another one escaping me, animation studios, all that stuff. So like, and that was all Rails. I mean, we were
Yeah.
slowly bringing in React. That was part of the work I was doing there as well. But
Yeah.
so it's definitely everywhere still, I guess. But it's just, I don't know. I just find I get stuck in bubbles, and so it's like it's always good to get somebody's perspective outside of the bubbles we're in, you know. So
Yeah. I've been searching for the survey or the poll that was taken, but I don't seem to be able to find it. You know, Twitter is like this black hole where things go in.
yeah, I find it's
You
hard.
can
I find
never
it's harder to
find.
search now. I find stuff sometimes, but I
Yeah.
find the search isn't as good as it used to be, or finding people is
Yeah.
difficult. Like, because like sometimes like yours was easy to find because your handle's got your name in it, but there's somebody who's contributed a lot to open source, and we've live streamed together before, but his name's Abdurrahman. But when I look
Yeah.
him up on Twitter, if I type in Abdurrahman, it's
Yeah.
not gonna find it. And then I forget what his handle is. I still forget what it is, and I kind of have to like kind of look through my followers sometimes, or like think of something that he said, and I was
Yeah.
tagged in it, and then that's how I search. But anyways,
Yeah.
um,
Especially
I'll
when your name isn't your name and your handle aren't the same. It's
yeah, exactly.
crazy to
Yeah,
find
and
things.
there's some cat chatter in the chat. SD's saying, "What a great cat," and I have two cats as well. So
Ah,
you have some cat fans there. Yeah, yeah, I saw Zoe briefly there, but Zeus is great too. Zeus
let
has
me see if this will
like
come.
very bushy. Like I remember the face
Very,
just
very.
having like very cute, but like grays and
His yeah, I like a
blues
little
or
bit of
grays and
gray and
blacks.
beige. I'm gonna make the sound and see if he comes. Zeus,
Okay. Oh yeah,
let's see if he'll
that's a
come.
good call. That almost always gets a
I
cat.
can hear him bounding down the stairs. Or it's Zoe thinking she's getting treats, one of the two.
Well, worst case we have two cats on the stream, but uh, and Bjorn saying he likes the names. Um, while we're waiting for Zeus, we're I'm kind of laughing because I told you before the stream like I always
Yeah.
book it for an hour and a half, and you're like, I'm not that interesting, or I don't know if I'll have stuff to talk about, and we're like almost at an hour and a half. So all that to say
Yeah.
is, Ridhwana, you are interesting, and it's always great hanging out. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we'll see if Zeus pops up, but I'm gonna go ahead and drop links to where people can find you again.
Yep.
Um, if you're definitely curious about Rails, whether you're in the chat right now or if you happen to catch this live stream later, I encourage you to check out the Rails guides. Feel free to reach out to Ridhwana maybe if you have
Mm-hmm.
questions.
Please do.
Yeah, and I think it's just great that you've been doing that. And congrats again on joining Circle. I wasn't aware of that.
Thank you.
And yeah, and Bjorn saying, and pretty impressive all in all. So the folks are impressed with you. And then ST saying, always the people that worry about having things to say are the most have the most interesting things to say. Oh, there's Zeus. Okay, all right.
This
I'm
is
gonna create a clip of that. So we have Zeus and Zoe and Ridhwana. All right. So
she's
it's
not happy that this is getting all the treats.
all right. So we're gonna wrap it up with a cat attack. Thanks again, Ridhwana, so much for hanging. I'm gonna go ahead and drop the stream schedule. I'm gonna be tomorrow. It's been a busy week, but I'm hanging with Dylan Mulroy from Vercel tomorrow. We're gonna be digging into a bunch of functional programming languages and talking about FP in general. So looking forward to that. And for folks who are interested, I do a live stream. It's called Two Full Two Stack on the CFE.dev YouTube channel. This month, we're gonna be building a browser extension. I used to work on a password browser manager extension for McAfee, so pretty familiar with browser extensions. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of just show how to get bootstrapped with a browser extension, and we'll try and do something fun with it. We'll see. I'm not sure what we're gonna do yet, but anyways, check that out if that's your jam. And thanks again. So many great questions in the chat today. And Ridwana, if you don't mind just staying on for a second, and everybody else, we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining.